see like a reading assignment list? Is it just like day 1 was chapter 1? Day, okay.
Yeah, or like whatever weeks, so you have to, I'm trying to find the syllabus. But yeah, just see like what chapters we're covering that week, and that's what you should be reading.
Okay, because I didn't see that in the syllabus either. I may have just.
No, yeah, I mean, it's kind of expected that you keep up with reading.
Because I see like lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3, lecture 4. Does it just say
Oh, I
chapter
see what
1,
you mean.
chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I
Wait.
assumed, so that's what I've been doing.
No, that's not true. Oh, okay. That's annoying. Yeah, I guess I'll have to fix that. I'm sorry.
No, it's like I just want to make sure that I'm reading the correct information for the exams or following along correctly.
Yeah, I'll have to like read. I'll have to make 2 separate syllabus, I guess.
So based on like the other information, so like for instance, are we talking about tectonic plates today?
To be honest, I messed up.
Oh, okay.
So we're just gonna finish up chapter 1 and go over some stuff in lab that I wanted to cover. Yeah, like I said, first time teaching this course, and
Oh, okay.
I kind of messed up because we were supposed to start chapter 2 today, but I didn't realize that.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it's not that big of a deal,
Okay.
and we can, because we're still doing like the chapter 2 lab assignment today, like that is still on,
Okay.
and so we'll watch a video in labs. We may just start lab a little earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and print out this old syllabus, except I can't do that on this computer. And then I'll have you the assignment for chapters, me the assignment for chapters.
term there, so I think they have one coming up next month. And it's free, anybody can go. You can take your family, they'll feed you breakfast. They take you around the whole campus, they split you off into your major. You meet some of the faculty, the staff, you see the workspaces.
That's cool.
And then they feed you lunch, and then you go home.
It was pretty cool because it was like dead yesterday. So it was
Yeah.
just like walking around and you can check everything out.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I'm looking forward to it. As an older adult, they still try to get you to move into their barracks. And they won't leave me alone. I've already told them I don't want to move into their dorms.
They didn't try that.
They've been trying,
We skipped over
like, dude,
that.
I'm married, I have a kid, I'm in a home, like a house, like, I don't wanna, why would I wanna leave all that for a dorm room? Right?
They want you to be there, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, you can do both. I was like, I don't wanna do both.
Yeah.
Why would I wanna do both? That makes absolutely no sense. One, financially, two, if I wanna save money, I'll take the bus.
Ride a bike, Bear Creek.
I don't know, man, the bike path's pretty gross now. I used to ride the bike path to Ashland, and then that one dude got decapitated,
Yeah.
by, was it like a transient? And then I stopped doing it, I was like, oh, that's, because I was, right, you know, I'd get up early, I worked in Market Choice down there. So I'd get up at like 4 in the morning and ride my bike to get to my shift on time. You're on a bike, you should do faster. Yeah, now when the dude, it was like a sword. No, this happened like 8 or 9 years ago. They found some homeless guy decapitated by a sword on the bike path halfway to Ashland. Now you can't ride your bike on the bike path without almost, hitting somebody sleeping in the middle. That's only if I get hurt.
Just get one of the big ones.
Sam loves.
I don't know that.
I know Nudies is leaving because of a big part of that.
Their Nudies, the boba place by Astral on the corner there. You know where Astral is?
I know where Astro is.
All the way to the, if you're looking at Astral from the main road, all the way to the right by the, on the corner is Nudies Noodles. They were a boba place, well, they're closing because they keep getting vandalized.
Huh.
Like they're constantly getting broken into. Because they had good food, and my wife and daughter loves their boba drinks. A little too fancy for my liking, but Astral's been broken into. Well, and they're a lot flashier than they used to be. They used to be very old, dirty trucking store. Now they're like nice. They've got these huge lots of displays of statues and figures.
Jack boxes that, big jacks that the store owner had used, none of them were killing valuable bags, man, he just grabbed those and left.
Weird.
Like, they showed me their footage of it, and I was just
That sounds like
you don't break into a game store, and at least, like,
they take the card.
there's so much more that's more valuable, I mean, even if you can only grab that much stuff, there's so much more that's valuable.
A deck box with some weird thing.
Yeah. Well, they grab it, grab just a whole box of stuff, I don't know, but, it's just a weird act, weird choice. You know, excuse me. And then I was having issues with my roommate at the time, the police came over, that's all my cards that I was in the whole sorting, and he started suspecting that I was a piece of it.
Dude, if that was the case, man, I used to have a pile, you know, I've got so much gold. I go through it every few years, just like, oh, cards are good. I found collections,
adorable though.
We're 6 days. I had like 15 of them. Because they were an uncommon, age group was.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I have 4 more textbooks here. So if anyone wants them, we can get them at the end of class. You could trade out your library copy. So those are from the science department, so you can return them to me at the end of the quarter. Huh? If you wanted to, because some people were complaining that the library binding was of inferior quality.
Yeah, that's not fun to do.
Yeah. So if you. All right. So I have to admit, I've already made a mistake. So I was so focused on the order of assignments of labs that we have to do, because there's 2 labs a week, and then it depends on the coastal trip date, because we look at the organisms. So I was so focused on that I wasn't paying attention to how many chapters we are supposed to typically cover. And so hence why I handed out this chart. So in all my years of teaching, I've always taught 1 chapter every week. Wasn't paying attention, so apparently we're supposed to start chapter 2 today. I am not prepared to give you chapter 2 today, so I apologize for that. Again, I had a whole different plan. I wanted to actually do some math, and I don't know if anyone has had any friends that have taken this course before. Well, good. So don't talk to anybody that's taken this course before, because I plan on changing the exams. The past exams seem to be pure memorization. That's not how I function as an individual. Like you would go take a history class, in my opinion, if you want that. And so we need to put just like a tiny bit of math, especially, in lab, some people freaking out a little bit about any bit of math. Like, we shouldn't be scared of math. Like, math is beautiful. And so we'll go over today just the basics that I expect from you from the math and kind of go over it.
I had a quick question. It says on here 813 is the field trip to Preston.
Right. So this is last year's syllabus. So I just handed this out right now so we know what chapter. Like I said, I did a huge oopsie. I didn't put it in your syllabus what chapter we're supposed to be doing because I wasn't paying attention. And that was my fault, like I said, first time teaching this course, also on the 8-week schedule, so I was not with the program. And I deeply apologize. So next week we'll be hitting chapters 2 and 3. That being said, we'll still do our plate tectonic lab today. That's all already on the docket. So yeah, don't pay attention to these dates. I hopefully did a good job. I started your course clean in Blackboard specifically so your calendar is hopefully correct there. And if it's not, I may just go cry because I will give up on Blackboard permanently. Yeah, so don't pay attention to the field trip dates. Yeah, that's what this is just for what chapters we're covering what week. So all these dates are obviously wrong. And I will again fix that ASAP now that I am aware. All right, so let's finish up kind of chapter 1. And so you definitely want to read, but like I said, I'm going to try to scale back the memorization on the exams. I did not like the previous exams personally, and I'll try to add more hands-on what we're doing to it. So I want to make sure it's a rounded exam. So, all right. Apologize for that. So let's go back. So we had left off, we were looking at the structure of the Earth's core and crust, so of course. And so let's look at, we mentioned, okay, well, we can't actually sample the core, so how do we know? And so basically, we try to surmise from how the patterns of earthquakes happen and where they detect the different points. So this is kind of, if we had a homogeneous planet, so right, the planet's made up of the same thing throughout, then we would expect the earthquake waves, so you have your source point here, they would be just traveling straight through, right? Homogeneous material, so there's not going to be any change of refraction. And, right, you know what we're talking about with refraction. So you go from, like, air to water, and so that would change even just, like, the path of light traveling. So same thing, right, with waves, so feeling those energy waves, so they would diffract as well if there was a gradient in material. And so what we find is if it has some sort of pattern like so, or they're saying, sorry, if it did have this pattern. So if we just had a straight where the planet got denser and denser, so just where it was just followed like a complete density stratification, so not having, right, liquid properties, rigid, plastic, so kind of not alternating, then it would be more kind of this well-defined pattern. And so these evenly curved paths. And so instead they find that we have these different kind of refraction patterns. So if we look at the P waves, and so P waves are going to be more compressional. They can penetrate the liquid outer core, but then they are bent. And so you have this P wave shadow zone forms in the angles here. So it forms between 103 and 143 degrees from an earthquake's source. So this is kind of giving us hint that there's, again, solid, liquid, so just changing composition. And then so looking at these S waves, so now these are side-to-side waves. And so we find that the Earth has a liquid outer core, which those side-to-side waves cannot penetrate. Again, just you would have to analyze your where you can detect your earthquake from your source point. And so now you get this really large S-wave shadow zone from where you have no detection. So that's how they're kind of surmising that you have that denser inner core. And so sometimes very sensitive seismographs can detect P-wave signals reflecting off the solid inner core. But again, we cannot be completely certain, can only guess. And so as we kind of go into chapter 2, we'll of course be studying the movement in the continental crust. And so some of that movement is from this isostatic adjustment. And so let's first look at decomposition. So you have, right, your thin oceanic crust, so it's mainly basalt, and it's higher density. So here's another just graph. So again, comparing the two, oceanic versus continental. So again, your oceanic crust is going to be your dark-colored igneous rocks, and then it's a little bit more dense. So again, that's why it's going to be on bottom. Notice it's a lot thinner than your continental crust, so that means, right, that's where the ocean is. And of course, the continental crust is going to be bigger and supporting all the mountain features. And so what's also interesting is, of course, you get what's called this kind of up-down isostatic movement. And so we still see the effects today. And so we see this in this isostatic rebound effect, at least so they surmise from the ice ages. And so assuming, right, there was an ice age, and so a lot of water was covering the surface, so of course that water has a lot of mass. And so physically, right, that mass would kind of push down the continental crust. And the little analogy that your book has is, imagine, you know, a container ship. So in the ice age, it's essentially fully loaded, so it has a ton of ice. And then, of course, as that ice recedes, or as you take off your containers, so they're unloaded, so then your ship would ride higher, And so by that same principle, your continental crust will rise. And so they say that we're seeing those effects in North America. Again, everything moves extremely slowly on these time scales that we're talking on. So of course the Earth isn't just going to rebound, but they say that that's why our Earth is actually rising. So North America is rising a little bit. But then there are also kind of crumble zones, they call it, around the border of our continental crust where the ice was, where this land is actually kind of falling in. And so let's look at this isostatic readjustment here as well. Again, what we're looking at, so if you have your continental crust, so your continental crust is a little bit lower in density, and so lower density materials are going to kind of rise higher. And they say you even get kind of this uplift effect from the roots, as they call it. So that's kind of the root of the mountain that's going down into our crust as well. And of course, not to mention, and we'll get to this in chapter 2, but as well, if you have two continental plates colliding, that's also going to just give you physical mass and lead to a mountain. And so, of course, we have a lot of movement and settling as well. So, of course, we can have new depositions, or just physically new land coming in, new dirt. We also have this effect called subsidence, where kind of the ground sinks a little. And this could be anything from taking out water or any sort of, petroleum mining. I definitely misspelled petroleum. So any other sort of, extractions from the earth. So anytime you start mining from the earth, now you might create a hole. That's why we have to manage our natural aquifers well. So we don't want to take too much out of our underground aquifers, because then we might create some sort of sinkhole. And so that's what you would get here. In this case, it's called a subsidence, where you have your sinking.
Is that what's causing, when you see on the news, someone's house just fell through the
Yeah,
ground,
something.
it just collapsed?
Yeah, at that
Or the
particular.
sinkholes.
Yeah, it's usually due to water being sucked out or something. So then right now you don't have the water there, so then the ground starts collapsing in, and you get those sinkholes.
Fracking causes a lot of lowering of the land.
Yeah, fracking is very controversial, because some people say it leads to earthquakes, which, who knows?
I'm not sure on the earthquakes, I just
Yeah.
know it does cause drops in the land, which can cause infrastructure damage and such
Yeah.
in the area.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Let's see, so that was just zooming in. And so I at least wanted to touch on kind of evolution. Evolution is another one of those kind of charged topics. And so I feel like there's almost two different definitions for evolution. So first of all, let's talk about, what happened with Darwin? What's the story of Darwin? Does anyone want to summarize that roughly?
His life story?
Or roughly, what was his significance? What did he do? What is he famous for?
The theory of evolution.
And yeah, so how did he come to that conclusion?
He observed different species and the differences within that species and what benefits that may have in different areas.
So that's excellent. So, he went to the islands, the Galapagos Islands, just like you said, saw the differences, but he saw them within a species. So that's kind of important, because, evolution gets really charged, and we're not talking about, did we evolve from some sort of ape ancestor, like that's still up for debate. That is taught though kind of now in biology, is how they kind of arrange it by the kingdoms and all that. There's supposed to be evolutionary connection, but we've never seen that in the fossil record. So we'll kind of look at that. But we can't deny though that there is evolution, right, in a species. And so let's look at that, because we don't want to say that evolution doesn't exist completely. Oh, come on. And so I wanted to show you guys this article, because this is kind of cool. And so recently, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to this scientist, Francis Arnold. If this article ever loads. There we go. Okay, go away. But basically, this is really cool. And so they were able to do what's called, they coined this phrase, directed evolution of enzymes. And so what they would do is they would either try to introduce mutations to bacteria or just put them under stressful conditions, so high temperatures or different chemicals, and then kind of see who survives from that batch of bacteria. And then you start with one generation that survived, you know, stress them out again, and then just keep going until you end up with the mutations that you want. And so that's, you know, really fascinating, and we can see this right with small bacteria, so they breed pretty quickly, so you can kind of see evolution over our span of time. And so I thought that was pretty cool. So again, we can see changes, and we can define evolution then is just that, right, a species changes over time. You know, you could see it in like our breeding of dogs, how dogs have kind of changed structurally. I think the German Shepherd has changed.
Is that all, everything that, because that could be like the natural selection and the adaptation and all that, it's all part of the evolution, right?
Yeah, so all that, yeah, it's just the controversial part is that we don't have evidence, at least in the fossil record, of, right, of the missing link or any species, like the transitional species. So that's kind of missing from the fossil records, you know, which you can go down the intelligent design view versus our 6 billion years, maybe random stuff happened. But again, who knows? But what's fascinating, so have you ever been to the La Brea tar pits by any chance? Yeah, so a few people have gone. So if you ever get down in Southern California, I highly recommend going, just because it's fascinating the amount of fossils that they find in here. So basically, in the middle of LA, there's this random tar pit, and it is literally like a bubbling tar pit. And so there's a picture, and it still oozes like to this day. So it's really fascinating. And they have been able to excavate so many bones. So they have this impressive wall of the direwolf skulls. And this is really cool, just so you can see kind of, you know, the evolution of this direwolf species throughout time. And it's so much that is being found here. Yeah, so and the tar really preserves those fossils. So of course, right, that's the challenge with trying to figure out what happened is these fossils are normally not preserved. It has to be under specific conditions where it gets buried properly and the bones are replaced. But yeah, so this is one example. So they've excavated 6,000 dire wolves, 4,000 saber-toothed cats. Like, it's amazing. And of course, they're hoping to find some sort of DNA, which would be awesome to analyze, but obviously any sort of living evidence is very difficult to preserve. It's pretty interesting. And so they also mentioned how basically there's so many samples being pulled out that there aren't enough scientists to study them. So they're looking for areas of research. Apparently, La Brea tar pits might need some help. And so let's see. So then your book kind of goes on to talk about, you know, the relationship between the earth and the sea, obviously. And so let's at least talk about the organisms in the sea. And so the ocean is, of course, a really important source of oxygen. And so why is that? What organisms are in there? What do they do? Yeah. Algae, yeah, algae are the biggest producers of oxygen. So, of course, they're in the sea. And we'll introduce some terms. So they have chlorophyll, which is a green pigment. So, of course, that's what makes, right, all our plants green. So algae is just like a plant, just in the sea, so it has chlorophyll. And what's the process called where they make oxygen by? What did you say? Photosynthesis. So, of course, they can do photosynthesis. And so, of course, that just takes carbon dioxide and water to give you sugar. So, food for the plant. And then, of course, we get the benefit of oxygen. And of course, this is also important for the animals that live in the ocean. So, of course, they can take in oxygen from the water through their gills, and we'll learn about that. And of course, they would release CO2 into the water. And so, of course, again, everything's related. So our ocean is also a good sink for CO2, so it's a good equilibrium. So, of course, CO2 can either be removed from the atmosphere by the ocean, not just by the algae and everything that is consuming the CO2, but just like the ocean is capable of dissolving some amount of gas, right? Just because that's an equilibrium, kind of like, just think about your soda, right? So your soda is obviously super pressurized with CO2, and it'll, you know, become flat over time and as it loses CO2. But similar concept, just on a larger scale, so the ocean can also dissolve CO2. And so everything's in equilibrium, a big balance. And so in the ocean, and so really the world is one big equilibrium, right? Working to keep itself kind of in homeostasis and functioning. And so in the water, your gas can dissolve and start making, it'll eventually make carbonic acid. So we'll skip some steps there. So we won't go too much into the chemistry, but this would only exist in kind of small amounts. Again, everything's in equilibrium, so this carbonic acid can go back to CO2 eventually, but it also can be neutralized in the ocean by, do you know what's the big source of, let's say, base in our world? Yeah, calcium, do you know the specific compound? Calcium carbonate. But yeah, so the calcium carbonate is limestone essentially. And so it exists a lot. It's in the ocean, so that's all part of the equilibrium. So if you have a little bit of acid, right, limestone can work to then neutralize it. And so this is actually what Tums is made out of, calcium carbonate. So. And so again, one big equilibrium. So looking, this is trying to show oxygen being added and used up by everything. So of course showing that oceans probably provide anywhere from like 50 to 70% of our oxygen, I think it's estimated at. So of course, huge source of oxygen in our atmosphere. Obviously, plants also work to remove CO2. So everything's just in equilibrium. So this was not in your book, but I just wanted to show at least the carbon cycle so we can think about everything. So again, CO2 ends up in our atmosphere. All the plants and algae, though, enjoy CO2. So we do have to have, right, a certain amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere as well. I think your book mentions the CO2 depletion event. Well, so there's a CO2 depletion event where the CO2 was around 200, I think, parts per million. I think we're currently at around 400 parts per million. And so this was, right, a period of starvation then for like trees, and so they could detect that like in the tree rings where the tree is starved of its food essentially. And actually, not to go on too much of a tangent, but since we've had at least somewhat increasing carbon dioxide levels, there's been research showing that that can help plants actually grow bigger or faster, so that's kind of interesting. So again, so photosynthesis, yay, then we get oxygen, so of course animals contribute to CO2 and people, and obviously factory car emissions. And so, of course, those animals and other organic waste products become compressed over time by our wonderful dense core. And so all that compression and heat of the mantle turn it into fossil and wonderful fuels. And now estimates are all over the place, so who knows what to believe. Some people are saying that we have like more oil than we expect. Because, you know, we don't know how long this process took. Like, we just showed up, right, started drilling oil, we found it. And so we thought that this might take, you know, millions of years to replace. And some scientists are now saying that we're seeing, you know, more oil. So, interesting. I like fossil fuel, personally, because it's energy dense, but that's another topic. And of course, when we take that fossil fuel, then we cause the ground to collapse from fracking, but it's all a great cycle. And so other things, we can, of course, try to look at the oxygen concentration levels, and this is just estimates over time. So, of course, we need oxygen to survive, so of course any sort of low oxygen levels might be associated with some sort of extinction. That's kind of interesting. And this line here is just showing what we're at, so it's our atmosphere is about 21% oxygen. Again, it's majority nitrogen. All right, so let's get into a tiny, tiny bit of math, because I didn't want to just skip over this half-life stuff. And we won't get too much into the weeds of this, because like I said, everything in this chapter can kind of lead to a thesis. But basically, the general idea is that you have some sort of parent isotope. So in this case, they look at uranium-235, and uranium-235, in the case that we're looking at, decays to lead-207, and let's see, did it tell us the half-life? Sorry, I'm trying to do some math. Yeah.
Does that indicate that we can only tell something was at least 4.2 billion years old? Or if it was older, does it show any difference? Because we're at zero, it's at zero, right? So
that's where I don't want to get into the weeds. So, like, yeah, you're kind of correct about this, and I didn't want to get too much into it because there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made for this type of dating. And so you have to, like, I think the assumption is that, like, there was no, like, lead-207, or, that, like, they have to assume that there was, like, none of one of these isotopes, or,
right.
and it starts getting, you know, weird. For me, I think it's easier if we, like, look at carbon-14 dating. Like, that seems a little bit more reliable. Because obviously, right, the next challenge is, well, why can't we just get a better half-life or something, or you get this more accurately? And so the half-life,
You gotta find one that has a long enough half-life. You want to look far enough back.
right, so you have that challenge of how do you measure the half-life on our scale, right, if you don't know. So you have to, like, make assumptions of what was the original composition of the universe, and then try to figure out the ratios of what you think it is. Oh, so a slightly easier one to understand, because again, this starts getting into like millions of billions of years old, is the carbon-14 dating. And again, who knows if this is even accurate, because a lot of this dating kind of depends on other assumptions, or like you have one standard that you base your date off of, so if that starts to crumble, then everything has to kind of be redefined. So let's look up, so carbon. And so the carbon-14 half-life is 5,730 years. And just like you were saying, though, right, there's going to be limitations. And so, of course, it depends. If you're just looking at a ratio, you have to have some sort of sample to have enough to detect, right, how many atoms you have. So that's, it gets very difficult very quickly. But yeah, so carbon dating is only good to about 60,000 years or so. So that one doesn't go very far. And so, you know, maybe you're seeing the difficulties in kind of double checking this carbon dating and even this uranium dating, because sometimes what's really difficult is like what sample is indicative of the rock, because you can have, right, migration of your atoms too, so everything's always moving, so it's hard to determine like what is even a good sample. And yeah, then you have to make assumptions. And then what usually ends up happening, so let's say you have a bunch of discrepancies in your uranium dating, and they're all off. They'll probably just end up going with the layers of the rock and the estimates that way. And so that is kind of frustrating for me as a more analytical numbers person, because I would want my isotopic dating to tell me the date of the rock, not kind of the other way around. And yeah, so I didn't want to get into it, But, yeah, those are good questions, because there are a lot of uncertainties, but.
Turns into kind of a best guess type of.
Right, and then, because then you have to figure out, well, which samples are even good samples, and, yeah, but it would be a good thesis to do research on. Like, I totally think these are all areas of, like, not, of good research. Like, you could really revolutionize, I think, our radioactive dating if you wanted to get into the weeds of it. Anyways, let's focus on what I want you to understand. And so again, I want you to understand at least very, very basic math. And so looking at this, and so a half-life means, so for every half-life, you lose 50% of that parent material. And so I'll kind of rewrite our cheat sheet here. But what we're looking at is, so assuming we're at 4.2 billion years ago, and we started with 1 million uranium atoms, so we're at 0, so times 0. I'll put number of half-lives. And then we'll put percent of parent. And so this is whatever half-life you're looking at, that's just called your parent isotope. And this is called the daughter in this case. And of course, if you kept going down the chain, this could change. Yeah.
That's when they lose electrons, right?
Uh,
Isotope changes.
no, when it loses protons. Yeah. And so it can lose like protons and neutrons. So it's losing, it's changing identities. So yeah, we won't get into the nuclear equations, but it's losing.
What does this say, half-life, how many million?
Number of half-lives.
17.
What?
It's every 100.
No, 700 million, the first step goes from 4.2 to 3.5.
What you wrote on the top right, I can't tell.
Oh,
One
this
or
one's?
seven. Yeah.
Sorry. Half-life is 700 million. Sorry, I didn't know where you were looking. Number of half-lives. So starting at this point, right, we've experienced 0 half-lives, so whatever your point in time that you're looking at, you have 100% of your parent isotope. And then, so that means after 1 half-life, now you only have 50% of your parent. And so that's shown here. And so if you do the subtraction of minus 700 million from this 4.2 billion, that leads us roughly to 3.5 billion. And so now we would theoretically have about 500,000 uranium atoms, and now half of those are lead. And then so you continue on, so then your second half-life, now you would have 25% of your parent, right? Half of what you started with. So now 50 goes to 25. And so that's shown here. So now more and more of it is being converted to our lead-207. And so now in theory only 250,000. And so right, you can just keep going. And so obviously, as it gets more and more difficult to age things, so 25, then be 12.5%. 4 half-lives is already 6.25. I don't want to screw up the math. So 4 half-lives, right, 3.125, 6. And so right at 6 half-lives, it's already getting pretty difficult. Like I'm not even sure how well you can detect that. So it's pretty interesting how quickly it decays, and again, how difficult this is potentially. Yeah.
And that 700 million, that's just for the uranium-235, so carbon-14 was the 5,000
Yeah.
years for each half-life.
Yeah, so they probably use like different isotopes for dating, but even then, right, if they're all kind of off by, you know, they can be off by a couple million years, so that's where they try to just do their best to guess. Let's see. Yeah, because I think it's mainly the uranium to lead because it has such a long half-life.
Right, and you got limited options when you're looking that far back.
Right, so I'm just looking up other potential isotopes. And see, the problem is like lutetium and hafnium, I don't even know how abundant those elements are. But apparently it has a long half-life. And then there's still the question of how much of these elements were present in early Earth. Nobody knows. So yeah, here's the uranium. So you can also use 238 and lead-206. So it has a smaller half-life though. So 4.4 billion years, or larger, sorry. So some of these have, right, larger half-lives, but I would question, A, how accurate that is, these billions. Because again, how can you do that on lab, on our time scale? All right, I'm going to extrapolate, you know, how much material we lost from even a 5-year experiment to billion would be a really difficult challenge. Yeah, carbon dating, I at least feel somewhat better about because we can kind of look at how organisms uptake carbon-14, like that's something that we can really study. So that's kind of the difference of carbon dating, but also, you know, it has limitations. But with the carbon-14, you can study a living organism, and it's going to be incorporating a certain amount of carbon into it. A certain percent of that carbon is going to be 14. Then that organism dies. It's no longer incorporating carbon, and that's how they get the half-life for the carbon-14. So that one to me is a little bit easier to understand, but the uranium lead ones do require some assumptions. But anyways, I am a chemist by training. And so this is just a nice overview of the Earth. Has the Earth been like changing age? Because I've heard like 6 billion recently, but I've noticed older texts say like 4 billion.
I mean, same kind of thing with that. Dating is probably the best guess, really.
I know, this is why I like chemistry. Is like you do the experiment, it either worked or it didn't work, or you quantify it. All this is a lot of guessing.
But yeah, I think I did read an article about it changing at some point in the last year or so. That I read. The article I read.
Yeah,
That
I'd be
not changed
interested.
in the last year. I read the article in the last year.
All right, so let's shift gears now, and I wanted to practice what I'll call like more math maybe, because again, we want to do some math, but we're keeping it easy. I don't want to scare anyone away. So let's practice these time zone problems. So let's start with this first one. So we have time at your location is noon. Greenwich is at 2 p.m. So what's your longitude? So just take a minute or so. Look back at your lab if you need to. Try to remember.
Didn't we leave the lab?
Oh yeah, I'm just interested in your longitude today. Because latitude, you could measure with the angle. So are we ready to try this first one at least? What do we get? Any answers? So West 30? Sorry, I was making sure I heard right. So West 30, so is that what everybody got? And so how do we get there? So, right, I'll just kind of write out. So we have Greenwich, so we know that's our prime meridian. So it's 2 p.m. And if it's 2 p.m. there and you're at noon, so would that place you behind or ahead of Greenwich? Behind, so that's how we know we're west. And then you have the 2-hour difference. So you just did 2 times 15 to get west 30. Excellent. So now try this one. So I'll give you all another minute or so now that you looked at that one. So what do we get for the second one? 30 degrees east, perfect. So think about it, right? We have Greenwich, 10 a.m. You're ahead of them, so that means you have to be east of Greenwich. So 30. All right, last one. So now you're at noon. Greenwich is at 10 p.m. What's your longitude? I think people have it. What was the answer one more time? Yeah. So 150 west. And so again, now Greenwich, 10 p.m. So we're way behind, so probably out in the Pacific somewhere at 12 p.m. So 10-hour difference, so 10 times 15, 150, so 150 west. All right, so let's shift gears. Oh, what? All right, so let's practice now some conversions. And so I don't want to make anyone, memorize the metric system and panic over that. But what I might expect, in an exam is, let's say, what if I give you the conversion, so convert 751 centimeters to meters given, so I would always give you a conversion factor, and it may not even be a real one. I could give you, have 2 blips and a blop, how many whatever. So it really doesn't matter, but can you take a conversion factor and then solve? So given there's 100 centimeters and 1 meter. 7.51 meters. So, and let's just do that so everyone can see. And so, have you heard of dimensional analysis? Have you done that in other classes? Or So that's just where you like set up your units to cancel. So you have what you're given. So you just start with that, 750 centimeters. And I just put it over 1 so it looks pretty. And then we have our conversion factor. So that's just any conversion factor that you're given. And you want to have it so that you have the units that you want on top, and then your unit that you're trying to get rid of is on bottom to cancel. And so just like you said, 7.51 meters then. That was good. And so then I wanted to look at something else. And this is kind of a tricky thing from your lab. Also, if anyone wanted their lab back, I haven't graded them, and if you wanted to correct it, depending on how you did it, you could do it. All right, so let's go over what we did in lab and kind of what the trick is. So we were given that the radius of the Earth is 6,370 kilometers. And so let's do this conversion because it asked us to convert to centimeters. And so we can do a couple of tricks for that. So kilometer is 10 to the third, centimeter is -2. They have a factor of 1 times 10 to the 5th difference. So kilometer to centimeters. So that means there's 1 times 10 to the 5th centimeters. Oops, I did that wrong. So 1 times 10 to the 5th centimeters in 1 kilometer. So then, did you get this number? I'm just looking at lab 1 that we did, the oceanography lab. You could have, so I have yours if you turned it in, and if you would like it back, I can hand it back to you.
Is the date on the paper not accurate? It says July 19th. It also says 2022.
On that paper, it's not accurate. The syllabus that is on Blackboard, I worked really hard to hopefully get the lab due dates correct at least. I did one thing correct. Correct. So labs I give you like 1 week to do, and even then I'm not going to be that strict about you turning it in late.
I thought you said it was due Tuesday.
So if you did lab 1 on Tuesday, it would be due on Tuesday, yes.
But we could just turn it in early if we want.
Yes, yes. And you don't have to have it, necessarily. I'm just going over this problem because we saw it, and there's a trick. And if you did this sort of same thing for the volume, you'll get the wrong answer because we're going somewhere with this. All right, so are we all on the same page? And then you were asked to do the volume. Yeah, so now you know. And so you were given this formula, 4.1888, and times r cubed. And so I kind of told people, if you came up to me and asked, I said probably just do it twice, and we'll go over why. So let's just plug in our kilometers. We'll plug in our centimeters, and we'll practice the conversion. That is probably true. And so I'll plug this in. So 4370 cubed. Oh, let me sure that punches right, times 4.1. So do we get this for the Earth's volume in kilometers?
I did the first time, but then I realized that the Earth's volume and
I shortened it to 1.
thought it was already cubed, so. I redid it. Got it right the first time.
Also, just to be clear, 4.1888 is just 4/3 pi. I just wanted to make that clear, because you probably have seen the volume of a sphere given like this before. All right, so then let's do the volume in centimeters. And then we'll look at the trick. So now I'm just plugging in 6.37, second e to the 8th cubed. And so now we get 1.08 times 10 to the 27th. Oh, sorry. And so now the question is, well, what's the trick? So let's practice. So how would we convert? So let's say we wanted to convert, our kilometers to centimeters cubed. How would we do that? And you can use this factor. So I gave you your conversion factor. There's 1 times 10 to the 5th centimeters and 1 kilometer. So what do you have to do, though? So what do you notice about this kilometers? Cubed, exactly. So that's the trick here. So this is a one-dimensional conversion, essentially, right? It's kilometers to centimeters. It's just to the power of 1. But if we were to cube it, we have to cube then this conversion factor. So that's why I was telling people don't do it, because usually people forget to cube the conversion factor. And so how that would look then is if we want to go to centimeters. So 1 times 10 to the 5th centimeters are in 1 kilometer. But if it's kilometers cubed, you cube that whole conversion factor. And so now that's essentially 1 times 10 to the 15th. And then if you do your mental math addition here, so 15 plus 12 is 27. So that's how we get the answer. So does that make sense for this one?
Absolutely not.
I'm so lost. I'm sitting here thinking, what am I doing in this class?
All right, well, don't think that, because I don't want anyone dropping the class. But let's,
Yeah, if
so
anything would have made me drop, would have been this.
that's not the attitude we need to have, people. All right, so let's go through this. Let's practice another one. So this one had a lot of numbers, right? So let's go back to our centimeters to meters. So we could do it in 1D. And so now let's practice another problem. So again, we'll use our same conversion factor of there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. But now what if I want to convert 5 meters cubed to centimeter cubed? So just take a few minutes, right, think about that, what we just did. I can zoom back out to that example. You know, write it out. Show your work.
I'm sorry, would it be 5 million cubic centimeters, because there's a million cubic centimeters in a cubic meter, and that's a cubic meter, so there's 5 of them.
I think so, you did the mental math pretty fast.
But it's just, I think for myself and some of the class, if we have conversions and they're in block form, the exponents and the fraction work, like I'm familiar with from my youth, but I haven't done it in a while. So it's sort of an anxiety trigger that I think for some of them is. So if we're in block forms.
Is block form this?
Like kind of how I just did the cubic centimeters and the cubic meters, that we can visualize them as static units, like individual cubes, instead of being prone to their exponents, like just simple volume measurements.
Oh, so
I
if
guess
you
is
like
what I'm
physically
saying.
think about a cube?
Yeah. It's an easier visualization as one block and equitable terms. Like I was a farmer, I deal with soil a lot, fertilizers, measurements, all those things. The great admiration for your organic chemistry things, that's complex. But like, you know, I know offhand that there are 1 million cubic centimeters in a cubic meter. So I'm just saying simple equivalencies, I think will help the class greatly enjoy the math aspect. The technical workings may be a bit of an anxiety trigger for some of us. Like if I wasn't familiar with these volume ratios, then that makes it very simple, that's 5 million. If I wasn't familiar with that and was trying to refresh exponents and factors unprepared, it could be an anxiety trigger.
All right, so. Sorry, I'm not sure where to go from there.
Like some of the base measurements, like, you know, I don't have a scientific calculator, and I'm not familiar with, it's been that long, like almost 30 years since I did algebra and calculus and those things, and I haven't had a need for it. So like mine aren't in factors of E or anything, mine are just long strings of number. And I made a mental note, get scientific calculator, refresh math you haven't done yet. But like for these, simple, if everyone's more familiar with the general metric system, it's just a decimal movement, because that's literally all I did for that equation, was that I'm going to need 6 more zeros to go from centimeters to meters. 6 more zeros, that's 5 million, because I'm familiar with the units of study rather than the mathematical conversion formulas, which will take some brushing up unless people have just had a more advanced math or prepared for a chemistry class.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm really not trying to throw any, like, there's no, this isn't algebra or calculus or.
I'm so confused now.
All right.
I'll leave it to you. It's a word.
You guys are killing me.
The block says 100 centimeters each, so that would be 6 zeros.
Yeah.
The simplicity of the metric system is it's all in decimals. So for doing land conversions and volume conversions, if you're familiar with metric decimal placement, it can simplify some aspects of conversion.
But converting from centimeters to meters isn't a normal, useful thing that we are used to doing.
Yeah.
Exactly, unless you're like measuring soil or
Yeah.
chemicals or those types of things.
So let's break it down by the math, and I'm not trying to cause anxiety. I just like literally don't know how else to write this out. So I guess, do we understand? So let's just start like with this basic conversion factor. Do we at least understand with here that we have a 1 dimension versus a 3 dimension? All right, so then, you know, for me, it's easier to just kind of cube the whole thing. I don't know if this helps anybody. But you could also, you know, just break it down, just thinking of doing the conversion almost 3 times. And maybe that kind of helps with the 3 sides. I try to write a visual, right? If you're just doing a line, that's 1D. Area, now you have to do it twice essentially, or square it. And then volume 3 times. So you could think of it, you know, like this, because you have 3 meters essentially that you have to get rid of. If that makes more sense that way. Because you have meters cubed, so that equals to meters times meters. So do these bring any more clarity, or are people still confused?
So now we cancel out.
So then that leaves you with 3 of those centimeters, and then you just have to, well, you could count up your zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's how we got to the 5 million, or 5 times 10 to the 6 centimeters cubed. I can write it one more permutation. And then I'm just rewriting it like this so you could maybe practice your exponent rules. Because again, I'm not trying to scare anybody. But if you remember from your exponent rules, if you have your exponent and you take it to the power, you just multiply them. So then that's just 3 times 2, which gave us 1 times 10 to the 6. And so that gives us that same answer again.
If you multiplied them, then how come the cube is still there? Is it just from the meters?
From the centimeter. So this is your unit cubed, right? So you distribute your cube so it goes to the centimeters, to the meters, and to the 10 to the 2. All right, let's try some more practice with this. Let's do something. Let's switch it up a little. So now we'll do, so given your conversion factor of 12 inches in 1 feet. So now convert the following. So convert 100 inches to feet. Convert 100 inches squared to feet squared. And 100 inches cubed to feet cubed.
My thing is, I was never taught to do this kind of math, so it's like, I don't even know where to start.
Conversions?
Yeah, like, I'm in school to be a kindergarten teacher, like, I haven't taken math classes to like, learn how to do these things.
Right, but you could set up a simple ratio even, like a, you know, you could set up any equivalency. So 4 apples to 1 orange. And you can still essentially do these conversion factors, is what my point is.
Yeah, I can go over some of the symbol block conversions with you when we do lab. That's just what I was saying. It's kind of how I visualize it. But, so, because I haven't done those factors
give people just a few more minutes at least to think about these things, and we'll go over it. All right, does anyone want to put this first one on the board, either the front board or the side board? What's up? Sorry.
You're talking about the 100 inches.
Oh, yeah, just the first D one. I may have to grab markers. Are there markers?
Down at the far
Oh,
end.
okay, yeah, those probably work. Oh, are you going for it?
Yeah.
All right. You want to do the next one, the 2D one?
I am not confident with my answer because I don't know the conversion for feet very well.
Even if you're not, it's fine.
I got it. Doesn't make sense.
So it looks like if you divide it, so 100 inches divided by 12 inches, so 8.33 feet. So that looks good. And I'm just going to set it up in the unit canceling way. Just, again, it's slightly more explicit. The only thing I'm trying to emphasize is both our conversion factors. So notice, right, you end up doing the division just like she did. So you end up dividing, right? It means the same thing, what she has written versus what I wrote right here. Same thing.
What throws me off though is if you're doing 100 inches to feet, or 100 inches squared to feet squared, when you're writing it squared on the other end, it's different.
So let's, what do you,
So what's throwing me off is the fact that it's squared on the other side as well, or cubed on the other side as well.
so let's set this up and then you can explain. So if you have 100 inches squared and you want to go feet squared, so this means, right, you want to end up with that unit. And so if we plug in this conversion factor, but then we need to square it, right? And so this means the same thing. And let me just rewrite it. So 100 inches squared over 1 is equal to 1 foot squared. And 1 times 1 is still 1, so that's why it's 1. And then 12 squared, yeah, 144. And then inch squared. And so now you can do inches squared canceled, leaving you with your unit of feet squared that you were looking for. So then the last little bit is just doing the math, so 100 divided by 144. Yeah.
I did that. What I did was with the first question, getting 8.33, I just multiplied that. 8.33 times 8.33.
I think if you had taken this and then divided it by 12, that should have given it, so 8.33. Yeah, So you wanted to actually divide it, right? Because if you're doing 8.33 times 12, that gets us just back to this 100 inches problem, right?
No. I took the answer of number 1 and just squared it.
Oh,
So 8.33 times 8.33.
right, but that's not the same thing, right? Then you're just saying that you're taking something that's 8.33 feet and squaring it, right? So it's just a different problem that you did essentially. Right, it's like finding that and then you
So I
just,
just got lucky that it's about the same answer.
it shouldn't, what, 833 squared wouldn't give you the same answer. Because 8.33 squared would give you 69. So you, yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so you have the right number, but it's not, it's not the correct factor, because you gotta,
Basically, the conversion changes when you're trying to convert it to something that's already squared. From like the first conversion to the second, it's completely different mathematics.
not completely different, you're just taking the factor and either putting it to whatever power your inch is. So first you did it times this to the 1 power. Then when you square it, you're starting with 100, but then you just do this squared, because it's inches squared. So then what do you should get a really crazy number, yeah, for
I
cube.
have a question for you. Are we gonna be able to use a calculator on our test?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you can for sure use a calculator. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it basic math. This is good stuff. Oh, thank you.
Basically, we can't do this stuff, we're not gonna pass the first test, right?
Well, so let's review. So historically this class has been what I would call a rote memorization class. That's not what I feel should be a science course. I'm obviously not going to change it though and make it like completely math dependent, and this is a very small portion. But I do think it's obviously important that you have some skills. So if you absolutely can't do this, I don't know what your grade is going to be necessarily. You won't score a perfect score, but you won't fail the class either. Right, like I would probably just put one problem of a 3-dimensional conversion and maybe like 1 or 2 of a 1D conversion.
So I'm so sorry. Where does the 144 come from? I don't understand because
12 squared, so 12 times 12.
Is this stuff we'll be doing before the exam? Like we'll be using this throughout this class?
Well,
Or is
I
this
think
like
it was mainly just covered on like the first lab, so because that's why I'm covering it today, is like it came up in lab 1, and so I wanted to like reinforce those skills. Obviously these are skills that people are lacking, and math causes a lot of anxiety, so I am kind of glad we're taking the time.
Are you gonna make like test reviews before the test, so I know like what to expect, or
There's study guides. I will try to put more math portion because that seems to be the most stress-inducing part now of this course, is the tiniest bit of math that I would like to insert. Yeah.
If we arrive to the answer in a different method, is that still all right, or does it have to be that same
No,
answer?
it's fine if you did it another method. So like I was saying, you could have started off with the 8.33 divided by 12 again and just kind of realized that's what we were doing. If you found some other way, like that's fine. We can also chat after class if you just wanted to go over your method. All right, so let's try that 100 inches cubed then. And again, starting with our same conversion factor, 1 foot is 12 inches. But now if we have inches cubed, we just cube that. And I can rewrite it for people if that helps. So, right, you have to do 12 cubed then. So you get something a little crazy now. And, you know, you could punch it in one step. I'm just trying to show it in detail to help people. So 1 cubed is still 1. Foot cubed is equal to 1728 inches cubed. So now we have to do 100 divided by that.
So we're not actually doing anything with the 100-inch cube? We're just leaving that alone and dividing the 1728 from just 100?
They're equivalencies because they're both cubed inches, but the one is the equivalency of 1 cubic foot is 1,728 cubic inches. We want to know what equivalence 100 cubic inches is to that. So we divide it by the total, and that gives you the unit conversion from the foot to inch. That's how she just did up there with the 100 divided by 1728. So we're skipping its unit conversion is what it breaks down into. The cubes and squares are they're all unit conversion.
So did that answer your? So what are you asking? Sorry.
So when I did mine, I did the 100 inches cubed, and I ended up with whatever, with 1,000,000.
Oh, you took 100 cubed. So that your cube though in this case is just applying to the inches cubed. It's just like a volume measurement.
Okay.
So yeah, in this case you wouldn't cube it, but then you would cube anything in your conversion factor, right? Because you notice the cube on your
It's on the outside.
yes.
Well, it's on the inside, it's whatever it's
In scientific notation, would that be 5.7 times 10 to the negative 2?
Yep. So 5 point, and I'll write this down.
Would it be 0.578 or would it be 0.579 because it rounds?
Technically, you have 1 sig fig, so it'd be like 0.06, but given that I've already scared everyone off, we're not going to talk about sig fig.
Okay.
Hmm.
I get 0.060.
Yeah, I mean, on an exam,
It's like 0.05787.
yeah, if you had rounded it to 0.06 or 0.058, that would also be fine. Like, I'm not going to be too picky like that.
Okay.
All right, how are we feeling? Do we need to try some more conversions? Yeah.
Like, I gotta say, I understand everything that's going on. I just think it could be displayed a little more clear. It seems like it's a little too advanced, like just looking at it. I think maybe kind of simplify it.
I guess help me simplify it, because I really, like, I've taught conversions for years, and that's as basic as, like, I'm asking you to help me. Like, I have drawn shapes.
I was just going to say fractional exponents approach college level algebra, which several people may not have had. As regular as it is for chemistry and science studies and integral things, a lot of first year college students may not have had that yet. So the blocks unit and unit conversion with the long division may help some people.
That's why I did it. It's easy if you
I guess so, yeah.
do the same thing. And you got 12. Essentially the way I did it, and this would be your feet.
So do you like keep the exponent, basically, just do the math and just keep the exponent?
Yeah, so it just depends on what you're looking for. If you're just looking for inches, then it's just typical, just 100 inches divided by 12. If you're looking for square, you would just multiply, or you square the conversion, which is 12, and that'll give you your answer. 3, multiply 12, or do 12 to the exponent of 3, and you'd be here. Just gotta divide 100 by whatever that.
12, 12, 12, 12.
And that's how
But
you
you
get
don't care about the one on the top.
So, well, that's what you're dividing by. So this is always basically going to be the same. So it's going to be 100 divided by, and this is your number that's changing. So 12 to the exponent of 3. So this would be 144.
So you're literally squaring each one and dividing it. So 100 squared divided by 12 squared gave me
No.
No, so it'd be, so ignore this. Ignore this.
Sorry,
Ignore this. I'm just doing that to show you guys what exponent we're working on. So essentially you're looking at this.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
See,
So-
now I understand. I thought I haven't been in math class in like 20 years.
Yeah. So does everybody at least understand that like what he wrote on the board is basically what I wrote on the board? I just kind of,
It's the same thing, but it's
Yeah,
just,
the divisions have to be used as a grouping symbol
Different
as
visual
well.
methodologies.
That's
I
all.
understand. I
yeah.
was getting messed up with choosing the wrong things.
Ah,
The whole point of the 1 foot over 12 inches is to say that it's going to feet.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yes.
that whatever your answer is going to be feet.
yeah.
It's the same thing, it's just, it looks
And the reason why the exponents on the outside is because it's going to be feet squared. Or cubed or whatever.
All right, let's try that again, but now we'll go the other way. So if you're feeling better, let's go 10. Can we just stick to what?
The metric.
Oh, metric. I don't know, I thought I scared people with the metric. I was trying to go to familiar units.
Well, to me, it's easier.
You guys are killing me. So let's go 10 feet, 2 inches. 10 feet squared, 2 inches squared. And 10 cubic feet, 2 cubic inches.
Do you know what the conversion factor is on that one?
Oh, sorry, it's still the same. So 12 inches to 1 foot. some more time, or give people another minute or so? All right, are we ready? Does any brave soul want to put the first one on the board? Anybody? All right. Excellent, excellent. And of course, the fan of the dimensional analysis, that's good. So 120 inches. All right, who's ready for the 2D? Any brave soul want to do the 2D?
I can try, I don't know if I tried.
It's always, trying is better than not. And don't forget inches cubed, you did it all correct, just gotta put your units at the end, or squared, yeah, thanks. So perfect, so everyone get 1,440 inches for that one. Or inches squared. And so again, always pay attention to your units. All right, any brave soul want to do the last one? Of course, maybe you're seeing a pattern too to kind of check yourself. You want to go for it? Yeah. And you could also put on the far board too, so you don't have to erase. Yeah, you could also put it there.
Cubed is good. I
Cubed.
have my calculator.
1728.
Thank you.
1728.
Exactly correct, but I know the answer is 17,288.
or inches cubed,
Inches.
right
Sorry.
number, I know,
That's why I messed up. I just forgot this is supposed to be inches cubed.
perfect.
Cubed.
That looks good for that one. And of course, you could just start doing, right? You started with 120 times 12, got you 144 times 12 again, 1780 there. Excellent, 17,280. All right, we feeling better about this, maybe? So I was inclined to at least give you like a little bit longer break because lab's at 11:30, right? Yeah, so I was inclined to end here for today, unless you want to just keep doing more of these. So yeah, let's give it an early break so people can hopefully shove food in faces, and we will start with lab 2. Oh. And if you would like to pick up lab 2, I have them printed, or you could grab them in the lab. So I'll leave them out in the front, right next to the textbooks. And again, I have 4 copies for 4 lucky people, if you would like to check them out. All right, I'll stop this stream.